Go for it, Adam.
Right. No, you're the host.
So welcome. I'm here with Mr. Adam Wadowski, actually in the UK, and we're recording in person. Normally we're split on two different screens across Europe or across the world, but we're here and we have just been swimming in the wild North Sea, and we're going to do a long walk in East Anglia. But it's been about how long? 20 years?
Right.
20 years since Adam and I have seen each other, and it's been great to catch up and to talk a lot about philosophy, about life experiences, and about meaning. And I think that's what we're going to talk about, isn't it?
We like that. And it was nice to have fish and chips.
Yeah, and fish and chips. Yeah, and Wetherspoons. So Adam and I, spent a lot of time together back in the early 2000s in Devon in the UK. And we've gone on our own separate paths since, some of which we've talked about in other episodes. But we talked a lot today about meaning and about finding one's identity and path and calling out of the many, many different identities and paths one may find. That's what we've been talking about from both a practical, a creative and philosophical point of view, and how those three things can be aligned and how one finds alignment within them.
And how different events in time kind of stare us towards different outcomes. And sometimes when what we don't want happens to be what we actually need, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's these sort of fortuitous events in life which sometimes come across as a negative at first and can cause a great rupture in one's own existence at the time. However, it may lead the seeds eventually to something that is both character building, but also pivotal to one's journey, to one's sense of meaning and knowing who they are. And I've come at it very much from an artistic direction, from an artistic background, and Adam very much from a philosophical background, but there were many, many overlaps between them.
And conversion, we talked about how staying the course can be challenging, but like this deferred gratification type, really sticking to sticking to the path as we understand it to be, but also correcting the course if the evidence kind of demands of us to actually adjust and align with let's say like a better understanding of the world and like when life events force us to re-evaluate, right?
Absolutely. And I think it is that thing, isn't it, that there's that old saying in therapy that the map is not the territory. It's a very interesting saying that so we may have things planned out in our head how we want them to go, and that's good to have. You have to have this kind of sense of direction. I mean, for myself, when I started taking painting seriously, I said by the age of 40, I want to be in galleries, I want to be making a living off art, I want to do this, I want to be in the top galleries in London. Now, I was about 41 when I made those things happen, but they weren't the top galleries in London. They were other galleries, they were good galleries. Now, if I'd stuck just to my plan, I would have missed opportunities that were within the territory and terrain of life experience. And I think one has to kind of moderate their ideals to the reality which presents itself.
Yeah, as it unfolds itself. And finding, and there's no like recipe for the balance between those two, right?
Yeah.
Like having a long-term plan and then modifying it as we reevaluate what is realistic and what is our limiting belief versus what is our insecurity of not daring to go beyond, right? And no one can tell us. It's just, and how do we get there? How do we, through experiencing adversity and overcoming it, we actually learn. Like we're talking about how there is, like, you can't really buy it, you can't learn it technically as a course, you can't really have a recipe for that, or have an app for that. It's just like a lot of the time you have to act on your gut instinct and like stick to what you believe to be the right thing, even at a loss, like perceived loss at the time.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's something very counterintuitive these days in our culture. It seems like in order to make any one choice, we should be having sufficient evidence and rational and like, so it's definitely not waste of time. And there's like if we want to be genuinely creative and genuinely authentic in what we do, sometimes we just kind of have to bet.
You have to take risks. I mean, especially with creativity. I mean, creativity is all about taking risks. I think as you get more accustomed to your practice, so me as a painter, risk becomes more acceptable within the framework, because there's something about risk in that sense. If you have taken a risk before and it has paid off, you're much more likely to feel confident in taking risks moving forward. If you've taken a risk and it hasn't paid off, you're going to feel less likely to want to take more risks. It is being able to accept that with risks that there is the potential for both success and failure. If one risk turns out to be a failure, it doesn't mean that all other risks. And that's where that overcoming adversity comes in, especially with creative practice. That the paintings that I put out into the world are just the ones that made it through the kind of filter. I've got the box. Everyone can probably see that. This box has got about 150 paintings. Some are okay, and there's some, but they haven't made it through that thing. I'm not willing to risk that, because I've got enough knowledge to know that I'm holding back. So risk, with experience, you learn a little bit more about it. That risk is important, but you have to be mindful of it as well.
Yeah, and I guess we talked about the necessity of feeling discontent to some extent, right?
Yes.
There seems to be a lot in our culture of like being the best, feeling the best, being so like there's a bias towards being comfortable, and you cannot really be comfortable if you want to be producing meaningful work, because that the authentic, authentically creating is to be a bit kind of hungry, like it's from a place of the tension, the inner tension has to be. It's the generative principle for being able to produce something of value. Right? And that let's say, maybe not anxiety in the clinical sense, but a slight insecurity and feeling, you know, the risk of uncertainty actually gives you that fuel of going out into the unknown, which you need for exploring new territories.
And I was sort of talking about it in the sense of painting again, that I'm only ever 60% happy with a painting, that there's no over that. However, I'm striving to make 100% paintings, but it is within that dissatisfaction gap between them that creativity exists and hunger exists.
And motivation is generated, because there's always this striving, there's always room for striving, and it's more about this infinite unfolding of possibilities rather than attaining. Because like you said, like that example you gave, someone just attained like what they, was it like a boxer?
So I was talking about boxing, and that you know, in boxing there's the old kind of thing that a boxer who went to bed in silk pajamas before the fight is much less likely to win than the boxer who is hungry for it. So success in that sense can be a trap. And the boxer Tyson Fury, he strived for all of his young life to become the heavyweight champion of the world. He put everything into it. He finally became the heavyweight champion of the world, and he fell into a deep depression. He didn't know what to do afterwards. So I think with creativity and with life, in many ways, it's not contentment that we're looking for. You know, contentment is, I think for creative people, it is not a satisfactory state.
It's a fleeting experience.
And it's fleeting. And if that's what one is kind of striving for, you know, it kind of it symbolizes or represents a state of contentment, of bliss, of not being moved by the passions. And to create art, you have to be moved by passions, for good and for bad. You know, inspiration and frustration are twins.
It's your fuel, actually, isn't it? It's like, I think Osho, she said, like, all these artists, they are sick people, and that's very in an essential certain sense, it's so true. Like, you cannot be too stable if you want to be creative. Like, you will not generate anything of much value if you're fully functional in any one given context.
That's right.
Default, right? Because then there will be no urge to actually respond to environment. You will be fully happy to just go about your day to day and not having to express anything in the sense that commenting on reality. So you have to be misaligned to some extent and discontent with like the reality that you encounter to be able to have that drive that is stronger than you. So you actually make sacrifices from, let's say, monetary or social or whatever it may be to actually allocate that time and to put your time into your creative practice. Because
it's so important to get it out there. And
it's suffocating.
It is, and I think, I mean, I've worked many different jobs in my life, from washing dishes to picking fruit, to being on the bin lorry, to working in an office, care work, you know, all of these kind of things. And as much as I appreciate those jobs and they were a means to an end, but there was always this burning frustration in me that I wanted a purpose, I wanted a sense of doing something that was more expressive. You know, I was going to say higher, but with higher meaning, but you know, I think there's obviously a lot of meaning in all of those jobs, and it's about what you put into it. But I always had this frustration at life that I wanted to find a sense of meaning and expression within it, you know, and eventually it came that after being very interested in writing, I was kind of looking for a medium in a way, an outlet to do it. And once you start to kind of fuel that beast, and I see this with a lot of students I teach painting to come in a couple of months later and they say, "You didn't tell me it was like all consuming." I said, it's all consuming. You kind of find yourself. Sometimes I'll be here, so I'm in my studio at the moment, within my studio, and I'm just working on a painting. Got no idea at the time. It may be 10 at night. Whether I've been listening to an audio book, but I haven't heard a word of it for 2 hours because my mind is. And it is that thing to get that painting.
To articulate
that painting.
To articulate what's trying to find voice. For me, these days, obviously, it's not visual. For me, it's words. Or it used to be music, but it's the same thing. It's like there's this pregnancy that expects to be let out, and you just have not found the right the filter to articulate it, and be image or words or whatever. And it is really frustrating because it can go for weeks, and then you let's say you in my case, it's like what I find motivating. I find it works best when I get myself into a regime of going to bed early, getting up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and I have my morning routine diary, and a bit of fasting usually helps as well, like having empty stomach and just sit down and having at least 2 hours of writing a piece, but sometimes just sit 1, 2, 3, a week, and you do produce stuff, but like it ends up in the container, right? It ends up like, well, it doesn't feel right, and objectively, it would be maybe for people, but you don't feel like it doesn't unfold naturally, and you've just sacrificed all that time, which you could have used for, let's say, catching up with your bills or something, right? And that non-linear, this sort of investment becomes part of what we talked about, how we invest this time into the process, and there's so many costs that are invisible to the outside world, that you actually, you see that end result, let's say, and wow, this may be of good quality or something, but then a lot of the process that leads up to it, there's a lot of commitment that
and
it feels not fruitful, but in the end, all of that energy is invested into whatever becomes in the end.
And it's the tip of the iceberg. We're sort of saying that, but you see, the article, the post, the piece of writing, you see the painting. But that is the manifestation of all that's kind of come before it or beneath it, or you don't see the kind of the fuel that got it there. And what Adam was saying there is really interesting about those rituals and those routines, and that creativity is not a tap that you go and turn on. You don't wake up in the morning and there's a creativity tap. I'm going to turn it on and it's going to flow consistently all day. It's not like that at all. They used to think in the past it was the muses, they'd wait for the muses to come.
The inspiration to come to you.
To come to you. But there's still something quite kind of semi-mystical about it, because sometimes we flow and other times we don't, and there's no rhyme or reason. And like I've was saying about this kind of ritual there, of that discipline to try and create that space. Does it work?
Yeah, well, it happens to work, but then the main thing is like how Brian Eno, he's an artist who can like synthesizer player, right, and a curator, and as he says, like, you can't expect the muses to arrive. You can't wait for an inspiration. you still have to show up every day.
Yeah.
So that requires you to detach from the result, and you have to labor for it anyway, even if it doesn't. Like any work, really, isn't it? It's like when you run a business. Like how many costs you will will be sunk in, but you will continue to if you have to really believe, and that's where the identity kind of forging to actually. When I teach people these days, I teach in general, when I teach them, whether it be a philosophy or language, and we talk about, let's say, job market and how no one can predict what's going to happen other than many jobs will just vanish, and no one knows what sort of skills other than, like basically mastering your own nervous system and your psychology and having some discernment about the world and what does it mean. And what I teach them, what I tell them is like, you, first of all, just whatever you do, like make sure you care about it. Like it's meaningful to you, not merely in an instrumental way, but in the existentially important, right? Because like trends and markets will shift and economy will change. So it's just gonna go crazy and crazy and crazy. So if you just invest your energy into something because it happens to be popular now, but it might be completely obliterated and probably will be within a year or two. So what's the point of doing that? So you are forced to discover what will stay with you despite any trends. Right?
Yeah.
Because trends will not be consistent, will not stay the same. So, and that requires you to do deep work on what are my values actually? What do I care about and why? And that requires you to really look inside and discover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, this idea of originality within work is important as well. But to turn up and to be there and to be present, to create a structure in which you can be inspired is very important. So turning up each day, like I will come to the studio, I will go for long walks, but even when I'm walking, I'm sketching and thinking about work. Meaning, I think, comes from making authentic work that aligns with your ideas, what you really want to express, and then if the output is somewhere close to that 60%, then all is good. What I find from art is that people do follow trends and they look at what is currently popular.
What the market wants.
Or what the market wants, and you'll often see this with paintings or art, that there will be, just like with music, there will be a series of copycat artists, but artists that think, well, that's selling well, so I'm going to jump on that bandwagon. And that's all well and good, but what happens when the trend goes? So this sort of struggle for authenticity, it's a long and it's a hard one to find that. I was telling Adam earlier that despite painting for many years, I didn't share my paintings with anyone for a long time, for around about so I was kind of painting for a while in my 20s and did share it, but then I had this time where I just went into my laboratory in the sense of working on what I wanted to express and didn't share my paintings for around 10 years, and then finally did share them when I thought that there was something in there, like I was saying earlier, that aligned with my ideas, some technical aesthetic things, and what I wanted to create, and got close to it, 60% close to it, and then was ready to put that out there. I wasn't doing it to make money, obviously, for 10 years, because that's stupid in a way, that you do something that isn't making you money, but was a passion, but it was that faith.
Right. To make sure that it is that thing. Because if you can do it without getting paid for it, that means it's probably authentic. What if you're getting money for it? You cannot really isolate that. How do you really care about it? Right? Do you care about it despite not being paid for it?
Yeah. And it's one of those things as well. It's like, you know, when you talk about meaning and passion and, you know, finding something that you want to do in your life, and do it even if you weren't being paid. That, you know, that is the key in many ways to, you know, to my happiness in a sense. It doesn't have to be for everybody's happiness, but I would paint all day, every day, even if I was not getting paid a penny for it. So the fact that I am now, you know, shows that it is something that is beyond just something about money, about making money. Of course, it is good to make money from what you do, but if you were to, we talked about Nietzsche's eternal recurrence earlier, you know, to find something in your world, in your life, that you would be happy to do ad infinitum, you know, on and on and on and
over
on.
and over again.
Over and over.
Living this life.
Yeah. And that is that sense of meaning, isn't it? You know, despite
all the adversities that are part of the journey.
Yeah.
Right? And like, can you actually design your life in a way that you would be willing to relive it infinite number of times? And it's a healthy proposition to suggest to yourself, because then that will really motivate you to want to avoid doing maybe unnecessary things that are redundant, right? And focus on what matters most.
And with it as well, that thing about that, you know, that passion and that drive, and through that one finds meaning, but it doesn't, you know, it's not an easy path, and that's where that contentment kind of fallacy comes in, that if I find something I'm happy to do every day, it doesn't mean that you're content doing it. It is a struggle, but it's within that struggle that the kind of the breakthroughs and that transcendent feeling, like you were mentioning earlier, when, you know, when something is right and you write a paragraph, or you know, you get that piece done, and it just seems there's a harmony within the universe when that happens, that can only be achieved through getting something almost
right, when the map more or less aligns with the territory, there's a degree of accuracy between how you articulate it in whichever language, the language of painting, language of philosophy, language of music, or whatever it may be, and the reality that it's supposed to represent. And it is a deeply satisfying, and that's the contentment, which is fleeting, but you'd be willing to keep trying for the rest of your life to get back to that level, to that state. It's like, as they say, you get that state of flow in that very moment when you find that there's this certain clarity is achieved in that moment, right? And especially when you share it and you receive from people whose judgment you trust, and you receive more insights, which you'd never even realize that it might be there, and through that communing and sharing this, what you already feel like being meaningful to you, it adds meaning to you know, and you share that shared meaning. It's like a sacred space.
It definitely is, and it's that connection. And again, one has to be cautious of contentment within that, because it may be, and again, I go back to that striving for the 100% thing, that we do get that moment of absolute kind of transcendent, aesthetic, brilliant. We could quite easily stop there because we've hit it. You know, what is it that will put you then back to the typewriter or the computer or the notepad or the easel? It is that feeling to that it is possible to speak in this way. It's possible to get this kind of almost pure metaphor for experience, whether it's through painting or through words. And if that can be done, I can do more, you know. So you go back, and usually what happens is you go back and you do it and think it's going to happen again, and it doesn't. It doesn't.
And it's also, there's an element of it being like washing the dishes, like you're never done really.
Yeah.
And yet you don't want your dishes in the sink. You do want them clean.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's the Sisyphus.
Yes.
Kind of
Yeah.
myth. You always have to push that stone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you should be wanting to.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like once you expect, you can only, there's a paradox. I think you mentioned Kierkegaard before.
Yeah.
It's like that. There's this paradox of you can only get the good stuff if you let go of the expecting it.
Yeah.
It's just like a basic thing.
Yeah.
Same with in this case.
And again with it, it's this, you know, it's this idea of being able to, with whatever language we choose as our medium, you know, it could be a visual language, painting, photography, drawing, film. It could be a literary kind of language through writing, it could be poetry, it could be music. But I think it's being able to become as fluent as possible within that language of our choice, to be able to express ourselves in the way that we would like. It doesn't mean that we'll always be able to get our point across. You know, I can know, for example, you know, all of the best kind of phrases and metaphors and all of that kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean I'll be able to get exactly what I'm thinking across. And that is the great thing about art, that, you know, it kind of humbles humans or the artist, because you are in many ways sort of comparing yourself to a kind of a god, a creator, in that sense, that can create something that expresses exactly what they want. And sometimes you get close to it, but it's usually impossible to do that.
So overcoming that shame is another aspect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because then often you feel compelled to share, even though you know it's substandard, but there's perhaps enough essence there that is worth sharing, even though you can see that it could have been improved in so many ways, but also giving it away just like that, it helps you to forgive yourself for being imperfect.
Yeah, and that is a great thing. We talked about last time we spoke about AI and art, and the great thing about art, literature, music is that it is imperfect.
You know, that's beautiful about it.
It's human. And it's human. It is this kind of, you know, imperfect thing, and it's those frayed edges, or, you know, little things that are just slightly out of kilter, that
texture and this guitar out of tune or something, which makes it there. You know, this misprint or something, and then people pay much more.
And in some places that can be, you know, amplified as an aesthetic. I mean, punk, for example, that's what, you know, the punk aesthetic was about, and you see it in art, you see it in poetry, Charles Bukowski or something. But ultimately, I think it is that the more you engage with that language of expression and find your own meaning within it, so you identify with it and use whichever medium that you find is best to create that, the more one is engaged with that, the more likelihood you're going to get close to being able to use it how you like.
And because what is it, that style? Like people, we all want, like, what is my style? What is my voice? Right? Like my voice.
Yeah.
And again, back to Eno, he said, distortion is character. Like if there's no distortion, if everything's smooth, there's nothing interesting in it. So that imperfection, in fact, is the signature of whatever the style you happen to have. But then the only way to develop the style is practice consistently and see how it emerges despite you. And even like, it's not for me anyway, it's not that, let's say, obviously, if I use Word, my writing will be infused with all what I read, and it's, you have to let go of the idea of being totally original. Just trying to be faithful to what seems most authentic at the time, and that will develop despite your wishes of developing a style, right? It's almost like it's not up to us in a way. Like we are being, like, it happens to us. It's almost like healthy to say it's not that we do create, of course, but equally we are these kind of, like Stravinsky said when he was writing The Rite of Spring, I was just this vessel and it just went through me, and that the greatest works are like that, right? They're just like, it's channeled through this avatar. And you happen to be just mediating these in a moment of clarity, these images, I guess. And
it is an interesting thing you said about style there, that style is just repetition. You know, it's sort of doing something with variety over and over and over again. And there's only one way to get it. You know, I think in the past I thought style could be stylistic, which is different. It is where you self-consciously try to do something in a certain style. But going back to language and art, I'm just going to read this this thing that I put out, and it was on painting. It's a bit so painting is a visual language. There are many dialects and accents within it, but it is a language. In that sense, painting is also a conversation, not only with the viewer, but also with other painters. The great thing about this is that it is unbound by time. A figurative painter is in conversation with Lucian Freud, Alice Neal, and even Rembrandt. A landscape painter, Joan Eardley, John Constable, and Camille Corot, et al. So, that thing of like style is the individual expression, but the conversation and the language is this shared thing. Nothing is in isolation. You see all music is kind of talking to other music with different accents, different dialogues. And I think when you find meaning as a creative, you kind of find meaning within this
greater whole,
a greater
tradition,
whole,
right?
Tradition.
And lineage of styles, and you find your place within that tradition, and you will pay homage to the masters while adding something that the masters have no access to, because they did not live in this era where you can bring in this context and keep the style alive. Like what I found very frustrating, and for example, academic philosophy, is that you're supposed to read text and then read a set of secondary texts and say, oh, so these people think that thinks this, and I supposed to interpret, what do I agree with these people? Do I agree with those people who think that the thinker thinks this is what they mean? And it's like, what about if I have a totally different idea and those ideas are not there? Well, then you can't have a conversation. But you have to fall into either one of these camps. And why would I even want to divide the hair into four, into thinking what Nietzsche thinks about this or that, if I'd rather live Nietzsche into this reality and say stories about what happens when you enact this philosophy in this world, right?
Yeah, definitely, and that is the danger of it. I mean, you mentioning all of those artists, there, of course, there are academic art historians who will, look at the meaning of what artists did and all of that kind of stuff, and splitting those hairs. There are then painters who will copy exactly the style and never break free from it. But then there are, other artists who see philosophy in that sense holistically and say, well, actually, me living it, I'm inspired by a conversation with Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, with Hegel, and that kind of
embodying it.
Embodying it and seeing it as part of not a separate thing. You are being your thoughts that you are having about the world, about this. Other people have had these thoughts, and here's some guys who are really investigating these thoughts. But it kind of makes you feel connected to something. You're not a madman out there just thinking about these things. It's part of a lineage.
And that's where the meaning in is as well, because meaning is that you need the context for meaning. Like, I always give this simple example of, like, say, a word, decontextualized word, frame. Okay, what frame? It means something. We know what frame is, but what frame do you mean? A window frame, a door frame? Is it a frame of mind? A conceptual frame? Is it a frame of the film? Like, so depending on the context, there's different meanings. And likewise, if you have a style, if you have a certain language, understanding the origins of that language and having a rough idea of where you're going with the language will bestow meaning upon your craft.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And that will be then existentially meaningful. Yes. You'll be part of that journey, part of that conversation again.
Yeah.
Right?
And it is, you are within a framework and a tradition. With visual art, there are things like composition, which has been developed over time. There is basic things that we can think of. For example, like the basic rules of composition. That is part of it, but there's something else to it as well. The technical aspects of, like jazz music. I mean, jazz music's a really good example. It is so, it's jazz.
Anarchic.
Yeah.
But you first need to learn all that theory.
It's anarchic, but it's based on these kind of quite clear structures. But within that, the guys can go off on these little set and then come back, and it's within that pattern. But there is also that idea of the spirit of jazz. What is this? What does it mean? And it's very similar with painting as well. That you are, engaging in both a kind of a physical and a metaphysical kind of discourse with it. By mixing these pigments together, these sort of basically ground up dirt in some kind of oil or gum, it takes you right back to the Lascaux cave paintings, where very primitive humans, they've even found Neanderthal sort of like artifacts in that sense, are seeing the world around them and are painting their experience in a way that it's a communication with others. And this is, as long as sort of consciousness has been around. And so there are those technical aspects of it. There's that kind of legacy of the different academies and who were the great artists and all of this kind of stuff. But it's also this essence, this primal kind of thing that the impulse was there way back before art became art.
The impulse to communicate your experience
and to create,
in abstract language.
And to use material.
And use, yes, and there was this thing, what was it? I was watching this documentary. And from those upper Paleolithic times, and there was this, whoever was the presenter, there was a certain kind of black that wasn't available in that area. And that meant that this artist, this caveman artist, had to travel like somewhere to burn that, to get specific kind of wood and burn it, to then get that particular shade of black. So those individuals already cared about aesthetics so much before they even developed, like a larger community. And it was such a big deal for them to have that tone of black.
But and see, that's so interesting because that is still happening today.
You go and you buy you go to New York or somewhere to buy that specific thing.
I mean, some of these things I have bought from shipped in from America. Some of the gouache paint here, they make very good stuff in South Korea. Thankfully, the logistics of the world,
globalized world,
but the Renaissance, a lot of the the colours that we see in Renaissance painting, in particular lapis lazuli.
Lapis lazuli, that's what then pharaohs were very good.
Well, it was so from the caves of Afghanistan,
right?
But increase, like the Silk Road and shipping and stuff, meant that the lapis lazuli became more available in Venice and places like that. And if I get this right, it was always just reserved for
around.
But for baby Jesus and for Mary.
Really?
Because it was so rare, but then it became
pharaohs. In Egypt. Like so the royalty, like that was
the pharaohs.
Pharaohs, they were buried. You can see, you go to the British Museum
and it's actually
so you get the things they were buried with and the artifacts they were buried with. There's lots of lapis lazuli. One of the most popular with it's a magical.
It's a magical, and it's interesting with the how things is, because then it became used in the church as a paint pigment, because they were the only people who could afford to commission it, so it's reserved for Mary and baby Jesus, and then it started to then travel through Europe. But in the 19th century, at some point, the French government actually sponsored a competition to see who could create a synthetic lapis lazuli. I mean, lapis lazuli was known as ultramarine blue as a colour. So they ran this competition, and there were a few different versions made, but the guy that won it created this pigment, which is now the most common blue pigment, called ultramarine blue. And it meant that our sort of caveman, our modern caveman, didn't have to travel all the way to Afghanistan to get this very expensive rare pigment. It could now be synthesized in the lab, and it's now so commercially available. It's a pretty cheap pigment. But it shows those, but also that pursuit, but also it's that thing, we want that colour that's important. So you bring in these other people who've got their own sense of meaning and purpose, say the scientists,
to develop that pigment. They have their own mission, right? But I was thinking also about when you said, when you seek out this particular tone of marine blue, it's almost like you, all that will and all that commitment again and all that investment of energy, then you channel through to that work where you use it. And it's like, you know, when you have all the prep for the ritual in like the witchcraft, Mandragora's root and this, and you have to you harvest this in this quarter of the moon, and like it's all kind of designed to make you labor basically for it. It's nothing so much about that particular circumstances of sourcing these things, but more like that you ascribe so much meaning to the process and so much labor to the process that then it manifests itself within the work of art itself.
Definitely it is that. It is sort of the alchemy. But then again, we're thinking about these things that they are, it's just material, but it's what humans do with material is that important thing. You take something that is two-dimensional, just colour originally from the earth, but you create these things which then enter the realm of beauty, aesthetics, and again, like with a great book or paragraph or poem, they're just words, and then equally they're just marks on a piece of paper, but it's the potential within them, the essence of what they create is, I think, the most sort of incredible aspect, and why we do it.
There's no, it's not instrumental value in it as much as it. I mean, it's the instrumental value of like, I write it in order to be recognized, I don't know, impress someone, whatever. Like that's secondary. That's obviously, but that's it. But the primary thing is that it's got to be that intrinsic value of it, like to reveal some beauty on the world, or like to create something that I can say that's beautiful or that's meaningful. So there's this intrinsic value to the process itself, right? It has to be primary.
And that's the drive, isn't it? The materials are just the vehicle. You know, the words, language is, you know, just the
technology. It's just material. It's like painting is technology. But technology
for expression.
Exactly. It's a mean to end, but the end is to care about doing that thing, basically. And again, whether it's functional, you know, it's like even so we've got fire escape science here, it's functional, it's communication, utilitarian,
or it's sort of transcendental in that sense of it being, this is beautiful, I can relate to it as a human. And literature does this. You read something and you're like, it resonates because you can match your experience with it. So I think, you know, with meaning, it's such a deep and complex thing. I think it really, you know, at the end of the day with it, it is, you know, out of all of the possibilities of where one can find meaning in life, you know, being able to work out yourself which is not your calling, that's not the right word, but what is the best way that you can express yourself within this world, if that's what you want to do, but also find that thing that you're happy to do.
And how to know that, and how to know that and it's not an easy question, is it? Because but I found that for me it was there was this moment when I was really involved in making music, and I had to face up to the reality of wanting to return to philosophy. It was disappointing because the music was doing well, and I was like, it was becoming popular, and I invested so much time, there was the whole machine was going well, and yet there was a deep discontentment in a more fundamental sense of not going in the right direction because I felt that my medium is really word, but word is so much less cool than being a rock star, isn't it? It's like it was so on some level so disappointing. But that was at the time when I went. I was so confused. I was approaching 30 years old. Now I'm 41. And I went to my pilgrimage to a Nietzsche house in East Anglia, and I stayed there for a week in February as well. So like heavy 2,000 meters in Swiss Alps, and it's full snow and like super cold, and I was just kind of working out my and there's you go around the Lake Silvaplana, and there's this stone where Nietzsche actually had the idea of eternal recurrence, right? So you actually walk there, you can see the stone, and you can reflect on your mission. And that was the moment when that was that must have been 2010 or something like that. And that was the turning point when I decided I want to go back to philosophy, but that meant kind of pushing away several years of hard work towards, let's say, making music. And
so do you think it was like an intuition or discontentment that it was nagging and you just couldn't...
I thought because it was like this. I was at the time I was at the DBS Music Institute, which is like a music production place in Plymouth, and but then the more I was obviously recording music and like doing assignments as you do, and then I had the band, we did that. But then the more I was involved in music, the more my essays were like expanding into philosophy. It's like actually, when I wake up in the morning, I did not want to go and log in and go Logic and mix music or riff. I'd be more like I'm back to my philosophy books, and that was that. I think that's also because we're talking. How do you know what your thing is? And oftentimes it's you also have to have this courage to face to what the voice that tells you, are you really doing the right thing? Or is it just very convenient to continue doing this while you should really be doing the other thing, which might be much less full, less money, maybe in many ways worse, right? And it might involve investing another decade of your life to get where you actually can do it in a meaningful kind of viable sense, commit to it. So it did take me another basically I had to make that choice then, and I decided, okay, so I have to. And also I met some people then. There were there's like a nuclear scientist, and there were a couple of PhDs from Cambridge that at Nietzsche House when I was staying, and went to the pub one day and one night for a drink, and I had a few drinks, and we were talking about obviously Nietzsche, and they understood everything intellectually, like about Nietzsche and about the obviously culture, very educated people. And then I ended up talking about like my Nietzschean frustrations about the West and the nihilism and stuff. And it turned out like it became very evident to me, like they didn't really care. Like they had the intellectual capacity, but they were not involved. Like they did not care. And I thought like, so there are very few people in the world who actually give a shit, like they can have the conceptual capacity, but they're not really involved. So there's very few. There must be if I come here and I hope to like connect, and there's zero connection despite that. So like, at least I should do something, right? And
yeah, that's interesting, and that's that passion and that.
And that recognizing also that what for me it's been a good guide, like what makes you feel most alive.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are things that feel good and you calculate and it works out and you get good resources due to you being involved in this or that. But then there's another thing that makes you all light up and you're like fully alive and you fully feel like this is what I'm supposed to be in here. Like this is what I'm put in this little sliver of time in history. And if that really makes you feel so alive, then that's probably it. That's probably worthwhile sacrificing a lot of other things.
I think it is. And it is like an intuition thing, but it's that nagging feeling also that you've got to do. And I think it's a good to expose oneself to all kinds of, especially if we're talking about the arts and philosophy and things like that. And there are many different other things people could get passionate about, sports or whatever. But the more you expose yourself to these ideas, whether it's reading or going to galleries and to talking to people, the more likely you're going to be presented with potential little sort of passion hooks here and there. And for me, it just so happened to be painting. I wasn't that passionate at school about it, or in my early 20s, but just a series of events, going to a couple of galleries when I was down in Cornwall, it just got me hooked. And that was my calling, you know. But for some people, it takes time to find that. Sometimes it takes sacrifice because it sounds like you have two kind of callings there. So one is music,
and they're very similar in a way. They're part of the same project in a way. That's why we're talking now. They're different languages. Philosophy is conceptual, and then maybe painting and music is more metaphorical, more symbolic, but it's still, I mean, these are very sibling disciplines. It's liberal arts, broadly speaking.
That takes it back to that language. Which language within those liberal arts, in that sense, is the one that resonates with you
and you feel most proficient in, and like natural for you,
and
right?
you feel like you would like to learn that language because that is the one that could express your ideas, metaphors or visions better. For me it was painting, because painting is an abstract thing. All painting is abstract. It's even the most realistic painting. But for me, that I like that ambiguity in representation, that 10 different people will see and respond to and feel the painting in different ways, project their own kind of vision into it. Some people like it, some people don't, some people love it. And that's something with paint, but it is an ambiguous kind of space. And again, it's just a two-dimensional representation of something, but it's that essence that either leaves people cold or absolutely draws them in. And I think that's for me why I found that language was the one I wanted to use. It was physical, but it was open to interpretation. It doesn't mean then that all painting speaks to you, because probably about 75% of painting doesn't. But that's what I meant with the thing I was reading out earlier. There are different dialects and there are different accents within it. Some really hit the spot and almost whisper in my ear in a beautiful language. Other ones I don't care to understand it that much. But because it's such a diverse thing, you can have that sort of nuance within it. I'm feeling tired.
I think we should wrap up.
Yeah.
I want to say that, and then that within each of these, say, major languages, let's say art, music, word, sculpture, whatever it may be, then within it there are genres where you find your voice as well. And we were talking, I asked you why landscape? Is that I just happen to be in a space where there's good landscape, and I use that. And then we talked about your genetics and how you were brought up.
Yes.
So it becomes, again, contextualized within your personal history.
Yeah, that's right.
And it becomes this integrity within your style being landscape painter, because that's what you've known and this is your history. For me, let's say my thinkers, I like most, I've been reading them for ages. And for me to kind of dwell on those ideas and developing them is also natural, right? So it's not like that. I think we also have this kind of cultural bias of I have to be right, I have to be truthful, I have to get it right. No, like there is no right. It's just your path, and whatever is consistent with your history, where you can be authentic within that tradition. Which makes it then for people to be evident that it's not authentic.
Definitely. And that's where the other aspect of it comes in. It's not just the output.
Despite the markets, despite what happens out there,
despite what
it will be the integrity will be evident.
The integrity's there, and that's where it comes into that idea of meaning. Do you embody the philosophy you write about? Are your poems, based on moments of inspiration that you have in your environment? Because people can write poems in a stylistic or technical way without meaning, and people can paint without meaning, write without meaning. But it's whether you're able to, live your art in that sense. And for me, just taking Adam for a long walk in the area near my studio, all along the coast today. This is my environment here. It is these straight horizons, skies, sunsets and things. So, what I'm painting is not stylistic, it's what I live. And if I'm not in here, I'm out there being around it all. And that's a thing, like with Nietzsche's idea that you embody your philosophy, you are the embodiment of it. And that, for me, is what meaning is.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And thanks for visiting me, Adam.
It's amazing, And likewise, thank you for everything. It's been a nice day.
We're still very full from our two Wetherspoon. Well, we had two
full 3-course dinner.
Yeah.
And the weather's been amazing all day. So it's a perfect ending to the day.
Good. See you later, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Here we go.